Well, the dispute over the Temple Mount, the most disputed piece of real estate in the world, 35 acres over which the Battle of Armageddon will be fought, believe it or not. Can you imagine? And a war that will shake this entire world over 35 acres. But it's not just any 35 acres. It's the place where God said 37 times in the Old Testament, I will put my name right there. And when Satan realized that God intended to put his name there, he said, well, guess where I want mine then? The wars began. 40 wars fought so far over possession of Jerusalem. And they're not over. There will be at least one more, and that will be the Battle of Armageddon. Zechariah prophesied about it in Zechariah 14:2. He said, I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. So that's what we're dealing with today, and there are so many articles over the weekend that shed new light on what's going on in the Middle East. I just want to go through them fairly quickly. The first article comes from the Jerusalem Post just today, and it comes from U.S. Ambassador Dan Shapiro. He says Abbas is in stronger position than past leaders to reach agreement, as is Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, he was speaking at the Conference of Presidents. Here's what he said. The U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro, spoke on Monday at the Conference of Presidents in Jerusalem, addressing U.S. support for Israel and the ongoing peace process for a two-state solution. Shapiro mentioned that Israeli leaders such as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are saying that a two-state solution is the only option, and that Netanyahu and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas are in a stronger position than past leaders to execute a two-state solution. Now, everybody that's saying it's not going to work, it's not going to work, it's not going to work, and yet here we have the ambassador to Israel from the United States of America, Dan Shapiro, and he is saying they're in a stronger position to make it work now. Both of them have endorsed the two-state solution. I mean, no one had until Benjamin Netanyahu in 2009 when he made his famous speech at Bar Ilan University. The article goes on to say, the ambassador stressed the difficulties and challenges facing both Netanyahu and Abbas. We know this is heavy lifting for both leaders, he said. He pointed out that a peace agreement cannot be implemented unless the Palestinian Authority has full control over all Palestinian territory. The ambassador also pointed out his support for the prisoner release agreements reached by Netanyahu and Abbas in an effort to continue negotiations, and the PA's refrain from taking the issue to the International Criminal Court. Okay, so what's he really talking about there? Well, you know, Netanyahu said, we will release 106 prisoners, and they are prisoners that have blood on their hands, that actually killed Jewish people in the name of being a freedom fighter. We will release over time, over the course of these negotiations, about 20 to 25 at a time, until we have released 106, I believe the number is. And he has been living up to that agreement. Because of that, it has kept Abbas in the negotiations, because there's loved ones at home waiting for their man to be released from Israeli prison. Some of them have been in there since before 1993. So they've been in for a long time, and it's very popular in the Palestinian territories for these prisoners to be released. In the meantime, Abbas, who had threatened to go to the International Criminal Court and file charges against Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli political leaders, also other military leaders, he said, I will not go to the ICC until we exhaust the possibility of peace. I will give you 9 months. Well, that 9 months is going to be up on April the 29th of this year. So we've got about 10 weeks left until this is up. Are they going to get an agreement? Well, it's going to be very interesting to see. Let me tell you what has happened this past week. President Barack Obama and King Abdullah II of Jordan are meeting in California to discuss the Middle East peace process and Syria's civil war. Now, that was an article from the 15th, and I believe they met either on the 14th or the 15th. Jordan is a close ally, Arab ally of the U.S. It's also one of the largest recipients of U.S. aid, collecting about $1 billion annually for the past 5 years. Abdullah spent the past week in Washington meeting with Vice President Joe Biden, Secretary of State John Kerry, congressional leaders, and others. Did you hear that? He spent the entire week in Washington meeting with Vice President Biden, Secretary of State John Kerry, and other congressional leaders. Abdullah is a central player because Jordan is seen as the most moderate Arab ruler in the Middle East. Let me give you a little history about that. It was after the War of Independence in 1948 and the Armistice of 1949, and it was either 50 or 51, that King Abdullah II's, it would be his great-grandfather. He was then the king of Jordan. He was on the Temple Mount to worship. He had gone into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And it was rumored that he was getting ready to make a peace deal with Israel. There were many Arab militants that did not want any peace with Israel. When Abdullah I walked out of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, a rifleman there, an Arab, shot him dead. Standing beside him at the time was King Hussein. King Hussein was 17 years of age, and his father drops dead beside him. His grandfather at the time dropped dead beside him. Now, King Hussein's father was mentally incompetent. Consequently, the heir to the throne passed over King Hussein's father and went to King Hussein. He became the king of Jordan at the age of 17. Can you imagine being the king of a country at the age of 17? Well, that's what happened. King Hussein then ruled for the next 40 or so years. I don't remember the exact amount of time. But he ruled Jordan and was very, very popular. He married an American, Queen Noor. He also was very friendly to the American people. He came to the U.S. to get his education. He received his military training in the United States of America. So he was very popular. However, he passed away of cancer a few years ago. And his son, King Abdullah II, is now ruling over. So you can see that Jordan already had a penchant for peace with Israel. And then finally, in 1994, King Hussein did make peace with Israel, signed a peace agreement, which is in force right now. So here President Obama is meeting with Abdullah II, who is considered the one leader that can be a go-between between Israel and the Palestinians because of his relations with both of them. So that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about Shapiro is saying we have a better chance at peace now than ever. Barack Obama and Vice President Biden have spent last week talking to King Abdullah of Jordan. And then President Obama, at a recent prayer breakfast, said that Israel Jews have a right to pray on the Temple Mount. This comes from Israel National News. This was on the 7th of February, about a week or so ago. I caught the remarks of Barack Obama, President of the United States, spoken at the National Prayer Breakfast event at the Washington Hilton in Washington, D.C. It's interesting that President Obama has avoided the National Prayer Breakfast until this year. He noted that as Americans, we affirm the freedoms endowed by our Creator, among them freedom of religion. And yes, this freedom safeguards religion, allowing us to flourish as one of the most religious countries on earth. But it works the other way too, because religion strengthens America. Brave men and women of faith have challenged our conscience and brought us closer to our founding ideals, from the abolition of slavery to civil rights to workers' rights. Later on in the president's speech, he said this: as we support Israelis and Palestinians as they engage in direct talks, we've made clear that lasting peace will require freedom of worship and access to holy sites for all faiths. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. President Obama has endorsed an arrangement whereby all faiths would have access to the holy sites of Israel, and he's referring in particular to the Temple Mount. He went on to say, I want to take this opportunity to thank Secretary Kerry for his extraordinary passion and principled diplomacy that he brought to the cause of peace in the Middle East. Now, in the meantime, the Israeli Knesset is discussing tomorrow. Let me read this to you. This article: Palestinian Authority and Hamas ring alarm bells over Israeli plans to impose sovereignty on the Temple Mount. The Knesset is set this week to discuss a proposal to place the Temple Mount under Israeli sovereignty. Now, it's supposedly already under Israeli sovereignty, but they turned it over to the Muslim Waqf after the 67 war because the secular leaders of Israel did not want a religious revival at that particular time. So they turned it over to the Waqf, and in the eyes of the world community, this was considered very magnanimous that they would turn the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock over to the Muslims to administer. Nevertheless, here's the story that's breaking just yesterday. This comes from the Jerusalem Post. The Palestinian Authority and Hamas warned Sunday of the Israeli plans to impose Israeli sovereignty on the Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Palestinian Authority Minister for Religious Affairs Mahmoud al-Habash said that there would be no sovereignty over the Aqsa Mosque and Islamic and Christian holy sites other than Palestinian sovereignty. This is the full right of the Arab, including Muslims and Christians, he said. Al-Habash claimed that Israel has plans to divide the Aqsa Mosque. These efforts won't succeed, he added. He was referring to routine visits by Jews to the Temple Mount and calls by some Israelis to impose Israeli sovereignty over the compound. I'll tell you more about it when we get back from the break.